What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Pro Football Focus Week 10 edition here on RotoGrinders. I am Britt Devine. We are one man short, Tybo down. So it is just me and Mr. Dank Stats, Scott Barrett. Scott, how's it going for Week 10?
What's up, Britt? Yeah, pretty excited to be the star of the show tonight.
Yeah, it's all you, all your cool charts, all the things you can't tweet anymore. Are they going to let you talk about these things on the actual show since you're like paid to do this now?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, we can highlight my charts today.
Yeah, so we got a lot of fun stuff here. Tyler, he had a little, like a work emergency where he had to do something. So just me and Scott. So if you like redheaded people, you're gonna have to tune in next week to see Tyler on that. So I guess, Scott, we're going to do a little bit different this week. Since just me and Scott, we're going to do a little bit more back and forth. We've got all our plays and all that. Let's have some fun with this Thursday game, Scott, because I was reading, I dig through all the stuff on Pro Football Focus for the show, and I ran across, we talk about it every week, Pat Thorman's pace article. And he's basically projecting this to be one of the highest pace games of the week. Seattle throws a ton. We don't think Arizona is going to be able to pound, 700 rush attempts with Adrian Peterson against the Seattle defensive line. That's probably not going to work. So I think there's some pretty good fantasy plays in this. Let's start on the Arizona side. It's probably not Drew Stanton, who's going to be chucking the ball probably 35 times tonight. Do you see anything on the Arizona side worth using?
Not really. Like you said, definitely not Drew Stanton. The wide receivers, so Richard Sherman's going to play, Sheldon Richardson's going to play, but Earl Thomas is not. That bumps up Larry Fitzgerald ever so slightly. 49% of Thomas's targets over the past two seasons have come against slot wide receivers. Seattle appeared far more vulnerable to the slot prior to that Deshaun Watson game. Larry Fitzgerald did have a 30% target market share last week, 9 targets. Production wasn't really there, but he did account for 40% of Stanton's total yards and 100% of his touchdowns from 2015 to 2016. Those are small sample size. He's cheap, though, so he's probably a good but not great play. He's the only player with more than 3 receptions over the team's past 2 games, so I'm going to pass on everyone else. Like you said, Adrian Peterson is 32 years old, coming off of a 39-touch performance on a short week against the Seattle defense, ranking 6th best in fantasy points per game allowed to opposing running backs. It's going to be a hard no for me. Might play Andre Ellington if in the Monday-Thursday slate, but otherwise no one on Arizona's side really stands out.
Yeah, I'm just I was talking pre-show with you. I'm trying to trade. I'm in this one season-long league. I have Julio Jones. I tried to trade for Adrian Peterson, and I got shut down today for trading for Adrian Peterson off of his massive game. It just blows my mind. But I like you, not really on much in this Arizona game. I'm looking at Seattle, and I don't know if DraftKings thought Doug Baldwin was going to be matched up against Patrick Peterson, but he has this massive game, and then he gets a $500 price reduction. He's going up against Arizona. I'm looking at the PFF grades. Tyrann Mathieu doesn't look really good this year. If he gets matched up against Justin Bethel, boom, that's like a touchdown automatically. Russell Wilson's chucking it everywhere. The Eddie Lacy experiment, I mean, it worked for like 5 carries until Eddie Lacy got hurt, and then Rawls came in. We've got Procise active. I could just see Seattle going, you know what, we're in Arizona. We're just going to air it out all day long. The $6,400 price tag on Baldwin on a week we're searching for pretty good value right now. I think that's one of the biggest locks in this Thursday slate I've seen basically all season.
Yeah, and there is like maybe a small concern Patrick Peterson could move to the slot. He did it at one point this season, but he very rarely moves there more than like 18% in any given game. I think he's only done that once or twice. But Baldwin actually roasted him the last time they played last year. I think he had 4 targets, 4 completions for 48 yards against him, most of that coming from the slot. But, yeah, he's going to be safe. Arizona's allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing slot. No. The 7th most fantasy points per game to opposing slot wide receivers. That's definitely a position of the field where they are more vulnerable. I'm with you. I like him a lot as well.
Oh, what about the running game? It looks like we're going to get some value this week in guys like Bilal Powell. We'll talk about in a little bit, and you like Orleans Darkwell. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So it looks like we have some running back value. If you're
Alfred
playing,
Morris too.
yeah, Alfred. That's one's a little bit more debatable for me. I'll take my shots on the other guys. I don't know. Are you messing with Thomas Rawls 3,400 on DraftKings? That's about as low as you can get for a starting in quotations running back. We've got CJ Prosise back in the pass game. I think this offense is going to take another step forward once Prosise, if he can stay healthy for more than a quarter. But he's 3,900. You got McKissick in there. I mean, Rawls 3,400 as a starting running back in the NFL, in line for what? If they get up in this game, 15 touches, that seems pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I get the argument. There's less of a committee now too, with Lacey obviously out. Game script could get out of hand, and you just start handing the ball off to Thomas Rawls, because why not? You're up by 22 points, and it's the third quarter. Still, I have a really hard time going that direction. Rawls is our third worst graded running back this season. He's playing behind our third worst graded run blocking unit. He's failed to top 40 yards in any game this season. I don't see myself playing him at all this week.
The Paul Richardsons, the Tyler Lockett, I'm a little more concerned with them that one of those guys gets Patrick Peterson. I don't know. I don't see. I think there's going to be enough passive volume where one of them, especially whoever gets matched up against Justin Bethel, will probably have a good game. I don't know. Do you have a preference between those two if you choose to pick?
Yeah, I'd lean Lockett's direction with Richardson banged up, but don't really feel too great about either of them. The interesting thing about this Seattle offense is that for years, so Darrell Bevell, the offensive play caller's first season in Seattle two years ago, they were easily the most run-heavy team. They ran a super slow pace. And passed very infrequently. And then last season, he set career highs in passing plays per game, passing percentage, plays per game, and he set new career highs this season as well. And they've just abandoned the run. I mean, I don't blame them given the state of that offense, but I'm still like always kind of nervous that they're going to go back to their run first philosophy. If they can get it working, which I'm not sure they can. But yeah, because of that new shift in offensive paradigm, we've seen Doug Baldwin rank top 10 in expected fantasy points per game. He ranked top 10 in actual fantasy points per game last season, but he ranked like 28th in expected. This is this guy who's just made his bread and butter on efficiency, but now he's getting volume too. We're also seeing guys like Lockett and Richardson creep up into the high-end wide receiver 3 range in terms of expected fantasy points. Better than their price tag for sure, but those guys are just okay, not great plays for me.
Russell Wilson, the highest priced quarterback on DraftKings this week. His pass attempts 45, 41, 39, 37. You just talked about kind of how they're upping their pass game volume. I don't know. I don't usually play the highest priced quarterback, and I usually don't play the highest priced quarterback when he's on the island game on Thursday night. On the Thursday slate, it seems like it's probably going to draw some ownership after a couple of good games here. I'm fading him. I don't expect a bad game, but just from, I don't know, the highest price and the ownership being boosted, I'm doing a responsible fade tonight, Scott.
He's the top quarterback in my rankings this week, and I feel good about that, so I wouldn't fault anyone for playing him. I'm not really sure what I do. I honestly never play the Thursday night slate just because after listening to enough of these monologues, I know that Thursday
I'm
is
playing Doug. I'm going to play Doug. I'm going to jam Doug Baldwin onto my Thursday cash team.
Dank Baldwin? All right. I like that.
Dank Baldwin's going to be on my team when it's all said and done. So Jimmy Graham, too, the other guy, I don't know. A couple of years ago, tight ends against Arizona, it was a thing. You just picked one. It was like the Giants and the Browns this year, which we'll talk about later. Jimmy Graham, he's getting a lot of red zone work right now. I think he's up there in terms of end zone targets on the season. What's he got? 4 touchdowns over his last 4 games. Can you play him against Arizona?
Yeah, sure. I mean, touchdown dependent option. Have him top 3 in my tight end rankings, again, because of he's seeing all those targets inside the 5, 10, 20 yard lines, end zone targets. It's either him and Dez for first in any of those categories. Like we know Patrick Peterson's going to shut down one side of the field. Doug Baldwin should do work in the slot. And then Jimmy Graham's your red zone option. He's a fine play. I think there's specifically 3 tight ends I like a lot more. So I'd have 0 or low ownership to him, but the play makes sense.
Yeah, I think tight end's going to be pretty spread out this week. I do have some inactives, Procise active, Paul Richardson active, Richard Sherman active, Earl Thomas inactive. Basically everything we thought was going to happen in there. Keep your eye on Procise. I don't know if it's going to happen today, but I expect him to be a big part of this offense as long as he can stay on the field for more than a quarter at a time. That's always kind of his thing. All right, so that'll wrap up some of our Thursday analysis, Scott. Let's jump in to some quarterbacks, and how about that? Now, I was kind of scrambling last minute for Tyler, trying to figure out which guys I wanted to talk about here. So I'll let you hit off. I'll let you start off. You've got Matthew Stafford. I think if you have the money, and I think some people are going to have the money with guys like Powell and Darkwa and maybe Alfred Morris make it into people's lineups today. Pretty much any statistic you look at, Matthew Stafford, if he comes away from this game with less than 250 and 2 touchdowns, I'm going to be pretty sad about that output.
Yeah, so just looking from at my rankings versus salary, I guess Stafford is my top quarterback. He's in a smash spot against Cleveland. Cleveland ranks worst in schedule-adjusted fantasy points per game allowed to opposing quarterbacks. They're the most glaring pass funnel defense that we've seen in a long time. They rank second best in yards per carry allowed and second worst in opposing passer rating. Dalton, Flacco, Keenum, Brissett all had their best or second best weeks against Cleveland. Really only Marcus Mariota, who was hobbled with a hamstring injury, disappointed. The only real issue with Stafford is who to stack him with. And I do see this as an issue. Marvin Jones is seeing insane volume ahead of Antonio Brown or any other wide receiver in the league over the past month of the season. But he gets set to draw Jason McCourty, your number 2 graded cornerback this season. Golden Tate's up against Brian Body Calhoun in the slot. He's our number 12 graded cornerback this season. But Cleveland's also allowing the most fantasy points per target to opposing slot wide receivers. We know they're hemorrhaging points to the tight end and outside wide receiver 2s. It's hard to trust TJ Jones. It's hard to trust Eric Ebron and Darren Fells, who rank 31st and 32nd at the position in fantasy points per game, respectively. So stacking options are tough, but just the matchup makes a ton of sense for Stafford. There's a few other guys I have in that range as well, though.
I'm telling you, this is Eric Ebron Undertaker.gif revival week when he sits up out of the coffin. This is Eric. This is what we've been waiting for 5 years out of Eric Ebron. This is going to be his week. I like him quite a bit. I know the snaps aren't always there, but it's a tight end against Cleveland. So if you had Ebron in best ball, I even think for DFS this week, maybe more tournaments, but you can shot take on him a little bit.
He's outscored Darren Fells by 1 point this year, despite seeing 20 more targets.
One of them's going to have a touchdown this week. It's like almost guaranteed.
If it's a touchdown, it's probably Fells, though. He's getting all that usage near the end zone.
So one of my studs, I obviously like, if you have the money. Dak's slightly interesting. I haven't processed all the information with Zeke out yet. But I like Cam Newton. We've been talking about him for a little bit. I've been calling him Scam Newton for that first part of the year because he wasn't running, Scott. But the running's back. He's got at least 7 attempts over his past 6 weeks. He's got 3 touchdowns in there. Dolphins, too, pass funnel defense, 30th in pass DVOA. They're 5th against the run in DVOA here. It looks like the offense, they're trying to get everything going on here, a little bit more deep passing with Samuel. They got rid of Benjamin. I think it helps them out. Now, Pat Thorman in that Pace article thinks this could be a little bit of a slow game. But I think Cam, the rushing upside, if he's getting 60 rushing yards with a 50% chance at a touchdown, he has some of the highest floor and ceiling combos you'll see of any quarterback right now.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, it's the same reason I was on him against Tampa Bay. The matchup's awesome. Miami's really bad secondary. But I'm going to make the same arguments that you made to me last time, and that's just that he does not look good as a passer. He had 137 total yards last week, 154 the week before that. He has 6 interceptions to 2 touchdowns over his last 4 games. But I get it. The rushing production is there, 11-9, 11-9 carries, 86 yards, 44 yards, 50 yards, 71 yards on the ground. That's huge. Definitely raises the ceiling. Like I said, the matchup's good. I think he's a risky play, but he's always a strong tournament play because of what he does on the ground.
Let's get to your value quarterback here. You've got, whenever I click this guy's name, and I think it's been this way for about 2 years, Scott, it never works out. And I've almost single-handedly avoided him this whole season. But the pace of this game is going to be out of this world. Both teams play high pace. Eli Manning week, is this a true thing that you have written down here?
So playing Eli Manning never works out for you, but I literally think the last time I played more than one Eli Manning lineup,
like 3 years ago,
was the game where he threw like 6 touchdown passes against Drew Brees. Yeah. So, I think Josh McCown's a better play. I think Ryan Fitzpatrick might be a better play. It's at least an argument. I think Tyler originally wrote down McCown, which is why I went with Eli. But let me make the argument for Eli. So you're talking about Pat Thorman's terrific pace article. Pace should be high in this game. Both teams rank top 3 in plays per game allowed. Both offenses rank top 3 in percentage of passing plays called. But teams are running on the 49ers at the highest rate in the league. It's a big reason why the 49ers are allowing only the 13th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. But if you're looking at that, they're way worse than that. They rank dead last in team pass coverage grade. They're surrendering the 3rd most fantasy points per dropback. And luckily for us, the Giants do not have any semblance of a ground game, though I do like
they got Darko this way.
I know.
He's the savior of the Giants this year.
But so basically a pass funnel offense versus a run funnel defense, but is also like one of the bottom 3 worst pass defenses in the league. He has 2 obvious stacking candidates in Shepard and Ingram in that order. He's super cheap. I like his potential this week.
All right, so I'm going to counter your Eli, who I like because he's cheap, and I don't know if I can say trusting Eli Manning over Ryan Fitzpatrick if that's an actual statement someone should make, but I think that's how I feel this week. I'm not sold on Ryan Fitzpatrick, but I'm going to counter you with Josh McCown, an actual good cornerback against the defense that's not very good. Tampa Bay is allowing the 7th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. They're 31st in pass DVOA, so that stinks. They're allowing a 46% success rate to running backs out of the backfield. That's 21st in the league. A 54% success rate to tight ends. That's 25th in the league. And a 59% success rate to wide receivers. That's dead last in the league. So why am I saying that? Because whoever he throws the damn ball to, it's going to be it's going to be a successful play in my opinion. Also, I like Tampa Bay. There's no pass rush. Lowest adjusted sack rate in the league. McCown's got the 13th best quarterback rating when kept clean on the season. That's ahead of guys like Matt Ryan, Tyrod Taylor, and Big Ben. You beat Tampa Bay through the air. I think McCown, 6,100 on DraftKings. I'd like if he was like 5,900, but I think 6,100 is a pretty good price.
Yeah, I'm with you for all the reasons you just cited. 2nd worst in pressures per dropback. They rank 4th worst in schedule-adjusted fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. And McCown has been great this year, and especially recently, 16.9, 18.3, 25.5, and 25.3 fantasy points over his last 4 games. I do think he is a better play than Eli, even relative to price. But I do like both guys.
$1,000 on DraftKings for a quarterback is a lot this year. I already see the 50-yard bomb to Robbie Anderson working. I already see that happening.
Right.
You're dud. You got Kirk Cousins at home against Minnesota. What's concerned is the offensive line, healthy targets, a combination of everything, just too much for you?
Yeah, it's the offensive line. So in back-to-back weeks, he was without 3 starting offensive linemen. He was without also a backup last week. And over that span, he totaled just 18.8 fantasy points and 2 decent matchups. And now he faces a Vikings defense that surrendered just one QB 1 week all season.
So I don't know. Taking quarterbacks against Minnesota, not something I typically do. So I'm kind of in agreement with you, not too on Kirk Cousins. I want to preface this by saying this Tyler wrote a couple things in our sheet before he got ruled out for tonight. So this is Tyler's view. So I'm prefacing this, but I thought he had some good points. I didn't really have a dud quarterback. I didn't have enough time. So I stuck this in here from Tyler. So Tyler, if you're out there, and if Jared Goff goes off this week again, everybody can blame Tyler for it. So he didn't like Goff, one, because his price is expensive. You know, do you want Goff at 6,700 on DraftKings or Tom Brady, even though it's against Denver? That's kind of an argument he had there. And he was saying prior to last yard's big game, he had top 20 DraftKings points just once for the year. He's worried they're big home favorites. And he's really worried against Houston, too, because you don't have to pass to beat Houston. You can just run it down their throat. He's worried this is a huge Gurley game, not a lot of passing. I think the Rams offense is plenty good enough to put up plenty of points. But, Scott, what's your take on this at basically what seems like an insane salary for Jared Goff? I could play Ben Roethlisberger off a bye indoors against Indianapolis for 100 less. That sounds like a lot better to me.
Yeah, so I mostly agree with him, but let me make the counter argument just for fun. So he's worried that the team won't need to pass that much, but the Texans rank 6th best in run DVOA. Wow, I just used a DVOA stat. That's pretty crazy. They rank 1st against running backs in fantasy points per game over expectation. Fournette and Hunt were the only running backs to rush for over 60 yards against them. And it took them a combined 55 carries. They only allowed 1 rushing touchdown all season. I'm with him in that I love Todd Gurley, but he's, I think, going to be at massive ownership. So those are some few stats that maybe should have you a little nervous. I don't know. He also came out last week. But that guy is now injured. I don't know. It's confusing. But Goff has never been, or this season at least, he hasn't been a volume guy anyway. He ranks 5th in fantasy points per dropback and 31st in dropbacks per game. Again, he might not need to pass much, favored by an 11.5. But the Texans defense is surrendering the most fantasy points per dropback of all defenses. So it looks like a spot where an efficient non-volume guy could smash anyway. Still, at the end of the day, I'm mostly not on Goff, but I think that would be the argument for him.
That's the price. Got on him last week. Congrats to you. You picked a really good spot. Huge price increase this week. I don't know. I kind of think you're chasing more of a Gurley game for me, though, in my opinion. So I'm going to start at running back because you just want to play all the expensive guys. And I have a hard time arguing against you, but I don't care what the price of any of the other guys are, Scott. I'm playing Le'Veon Bell. I'm going to have plenty of value, I think, by the time the week opens up. 104 opportunities over his past 3 games. This is like unheard of fantasy football opportunities for this guy. He's rested off a bye week. That seems pretty good. And Big Ben, too, rested off a bye week for a quarterback that always has these nagging injuries. I just think Pittsburgh goes in and just rolls Indianapolis. They also lost Indy did. Henry Anderson. It was like this freak injury. He was PFF's 38th graded interior defender. That's going to open it up a little bit better for Bell. The Colts 22nd in rush DVOA. Oops, I said the word again. But they're also dead last in DVOA against running backs on pass plays. I don't care what he costs. I don't think if he was 10-5 on DraftKings, I'd give it a second look. But 9,800, I really don't care. I'm just playing him. Basically every lineup I make.
Yeah, but here's the thing. So you're citing Le'Veon Bell as having this amazing workload, which is true. Leads all players in expected fantasy points per game. But Melvin Gordon leads over the past month of the season. That's despite dealing with a foot injury in week 8, a shoulder injury in week 7. The Jaguars' run defense is going to be a little bit better with Marcel Darius coming in there. I check and see if he's practicing.
You want to quote me Melvin Gordon against the Giants, against the Raiders, and against New England? I mean, he had a bad game against Denver, but that's what you're coming at me with.
Denver's a tough matchup for sure. But I'm saying volume has been better than Bell over the past month of the season in terms of expected fantasy points. The Jaguars, again, they're getting Darius back, but the ranked second worst in yards per carry allowed, first in opposing passer rating. It looks like a run funnel defense. And then LaShawn McCoy, so he was right up there with Bell in terms of volume outside of a bizarro, like last week, seeing 12 carries and 1 target that made 0 sense. But in the 4 games before that, saw 27, 23, 19, and 20 carries, 7, 7, 9, and 3 targets. Ownership should be much lower in a game that Vegas thinks remains close. Saints ranked 9th worst in yards per carry allowed, 3rd most in targets per game to opposing running backs. Maybe no one's going to be on Ingram. Jordan Howard plus Bears defense stacks. I mean, there's just a ton of cheaper than Bell, but still high-priced running backs to like this week.
Yeah, I like the mid-tier. We'll hit on Bell or on Hyde and Howard in a second here. We'll have a little bit of extra.
I didn't even get to Gurley or Fournette either. Those guys.
Yeah, I think all these guys are good. I've seen the Todd Gurley vanish from the game script. They put up 51 points last week, and I mean, he had 2 touchdowns, but 19 opportunities. We've seen LaShawn McCoy, random. They're like, hey, let's not give our best player the football for half the game last week. I don't know. Ever since Le'Veon Bell had the game against Jacksonville, we're like, hey, maybe you should give me the ball more. They're just like, hey, here's 104 opportunities. I think they know to give the ball to Le'Veon Bell. I'm a little concerned. I think the Jaguars are going to feed Leonard Fournette. I don't really have that concern. I'm just concerned coaches do stupid things sometimes, Scott, and I don't think that's going to happen to Bell this week.
Yeah, I don't think that you ever really have that risk with Bell, but you are paying $1,000 more for that premium, and probably higher ownership than a guy like McCoy. The thing with Gurley, so like I already cited why Texans might be a bad run defense still. I don't really see that. And Vegas is projecting a ton of points for the Rams. I think the lead in implied total. And he leads all players in opportunities inside the 10, 20, and 5-yard lines per game, and in market share. We did see Malcolm Brown come in and get 15 carries in garbage time last week, but he's now out for the rest of the year. Fournette is a guy who I'm never really on as much as the rest of the field, but he does have a fairly sexy matchup this week.
He seems like a player too that could get angry for the fact he got benched for maybe missing a team photo and like an ankle massage or something like that. Seems like he might be angry about that.
They also have and him running angry. Him running angry is definitely scary. That line gives me the creeps though. The Jaguars are only favored by 3.5 at home. I'm not sure why.
Because the Chargers are going to the Super Bowl. The Chargers are good. They lost a bunch of fluky games on missed field goals. The Chargers are a good team.
But that's been 3 years in a row we're saying that, where they're a good team that's just unlucky and dealing with bad injuries, which is probably true. But still, I think they should smash, and I'm kind of annoyed that Fournette and this defense only favored by 3.5. Actually, that Dallas line was like the most concerning to me. They were dogs by 2.5. I was like prepared to bet a bunch of money on it. And then Zeke gets suspended. I'm like, oh, that's why Vegas is smarter than me. Yeah,
Vegas, they know they have the inside info before it even happens. So a couple other guys. Let's talk value running backs, because I don't know if Matt Forte is out. I don't see how I'm not just jamming in Bilal Powell. Now you mentioned this is why too that yards per carry against Jacksonville. Take out that Bilal Powell fluky run. Let's do that and see what their yards per carry is. I don't know if you can do that, but I don't think Forte plays. And as bad as Tampa Bay is against the pass, they're still 22nd in DVOA versus the run and 29th in DVOA against running backs out of the backfield. And if you go over to Sharp Football, they allow an above average success rate to running back passes out of the backfield. We saw what Powell did when Forte missed week 4, 190 total yards on 26 opportunities and a touchdown. Now, granted, 80 of that and the touchdown, I think, was that fluky play, but he was still doing okay here. He's 10th in the league in yards per carry at 4.7. You probably didn't know that. He's got a higher PFF elusive rating than Le'Veon Bell and Melvin Gordon. I can see Melvin Gordon because no, he doesn't really make anybody miss, but it is higher than Le'Veon Bell. So I just think Powell, if Forte's out, I know they have McGuire, Scott, but I'm going to be jamming in Powell. I think he gets 20 opportunities pretty easily this week.
Yeah, you're citing some Bilal Powell efficiency stats, and he ranked top 5 in pretty much everything last season as well. Yards per carry, yards after contact, missed tackles forced per attempt, missed tackles forced per touch, breakaway percentage, elusive rating, all that stuff. Crushed it. The concern with him was always volume, and I'm not sure it's going to be too great this week. He only saw 67% of the carries last time Forte missed. Only, I think, 80% of the targets. He would have had a super unproductive day outside of that one run. I think he's a great play. Way too cheap for sure. I like him more than Alf Morris, but I'm not sure by how much. I think it's actually fairly close.
How about more than the savior of the Giants season, Orleans Darkwa?
I think there needs to be a legitimate argument for him. It's one of those cases where the matchup is too good and volume is kind of predictable. Over his last 3 games, he's seen 46 carries, 63% of the carries, 6 targets, and both of the teams 2 carries inside the 10-yard line. The 49ers are allowing the most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs for the 3rd consecutive season. They're allowing 4.6 more than the next closest team. When just looking at the fantasy points allowed to a team's highest scoring running back, their 22.1 fantasy points per game allowed over the past 2 seasons is more than anyone but David Johnson and Le'Veon Bell. But the top value play is the guy we seem to be talking about every single week, and that's Carlos Hyde. His volume just never is always way greater than what his price tag seems to be, especially on DraftKings. He ranks 12th among running backs in carries, 2nd in targets, 5th in opportunities inside the 10-yard line, 5th in expected fantasy points per game, 11th in actual fantasy points per game. Price tag well below this, but his workload has also been super consistent outside of just one.
Let me jump in here. I want to ask, because I was looking at this and I was like, the 49ers, Beathard's horrible and the 49ers are horrible, but they're favored in this game. So I'm looking at 11 targets, 9 targets, and 8 targets, and 6 targets. Are those good? If this is 21-20, are they going to run them, or do we want all those targets? I want the targets on DraftKings. I want that PPR.
So I think they're dogs by 2.5, or at the very least, it's going to be super close. I wouldn't be too worried about game script getting out of hand. And I mean, Pierre Garçon's out, Trent Taylor's out, George Kittle's out, and just watching last week's game, it just seemed like Hyde was the first read on every single play. Giants, their defense is not good, and it's not good against the ground. They've surrendered 100 yards rushing to every team they faced but Denver. That's including teams like Seattle. So I don't know. I think Hyde's a great play.
The Giants, too, I feel like the players don't want to play for Ben McAdoo. They do these strange things, and he's suspending some of their better players, and I think they've had enough. And I don't know. I think the Giants have almost quit on him, and I'm surprised he made it through this week, still an NFL head coach. And I think if they don't trounce the 49ers, if the 49ers somehow beat them by 10 points, I think McAdoo's probably going to get fired. And I don't think the players want him as their head coach right now. So
I'm with you.
That's mine for Carlos Hyde. What about, I was debating too, Jordan Howard, because the Packers are just horrible, Scott. They have no offense anymore. And the Bears are just going to come out and give him the ball 20 to 25 times. Legitimately, he had 36 carries in a game already in a close competitive game. This is a pretty tough decision between Hyde or Howard. Are you going to lean Hyde on that one?
At price, definitely Hyde. I think I have Howard ahead in my half-point PPR rankings, not full-point PPR. The concern with Howard is the same one I've had for a few weeks now, though I have recommended him a few times. It's just that because he doesn't catch passes, the entirety of his fantasy value comes from scoring touchdowns. And I'm not sure Chicago's offense is really good enough to make too many trips to the end zone or even really get in there. I'm going to play a bunch of Howard, but every single one of those lineups is going to be paired with the Bears defense. And just the thinking there is, Green Bay's offense being so bad, it puts them close to the end zone, closer for Jordan Howard garbage time touchdowns.
Mike McCarthy has basically kept his job because Aaron Rodgers has been his quarterback for 10 years, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah.
Like he's worth it's such a different game in there. So wasted fantasy is this Packers offense right now. So let's go real quick, Scott. Let's look at some of the cool stuff behind the paywall at Pro Football Focus. We were talking a little pre-show. It's $40 to get access to a whole bunch of articles. You get the grades, you get the cornerback matchup cheats, the tight end. I actually think in today's DFS world, probably one of the better values out there for information if you're looking to just kind of take your own research up to the next level. I'll give you a minute to talk about your big article, your baby, actual opportunity. I've got this nice big chart for everybody to look at right here.
Right. So I did a few things different this week. The most efficient player of the week was T.Y. Hilton, who turned 15.7 expected fantasy points into 34.5 actual fantasy points. So he was the chalk, but I'm not sure how great of a play that he really was. He did crush on deep targets, as we all expected, because that's where the Texans are super vulnerable. But a huge chunk of his fantasy points, an 80-yard score, came on just a simple 5-yard target that he took to the house. Tyler Lockett.
A little bit of a fluky play there.
A little bit, yeah. Tyler Lockett was the least efficient player of the week. I talked about Demaryius Thomas versus Emmanuel Sanders. So in every single game Osweiler started, they both played. Thomas averaged 16.1 expected fantasy points, while Sanders averaged 13.7. In 18 games with Trevor Siemian that they both played, Thomas averaged just 15, while Sanders averages 15.6. That's why you'll see, if you look at my rankings, Thomas is significantly higher than Sanders. Though I've gone back and forth on this, I'm interested to see how bad Thomas's injury really is. Sanders, with Osweiler especially, becomes this high A-dot deep target guy, and that's where New England has been most vulnerable this season, but definitely not going to play him unless Thomas's injury is significant.
Some of those Brock Osweiler passes from last week. Oh boy, those things were a thing of beauty.
Yeah.
We don't have a ton of time. There's the snaps and pace article. We'll talk about this on some of the other ones. But you can get access to all this stuff. You can get all the grades, which I don't even show you, and they're filtered really nice. You can go team by team. You can get lists. I think you can even download them to CSV to throw them into Excel and do your own stuff with them. It's $39.99. I think it's a pretty good package if you're looking, just for a little bit next level DFS analysis on your own to read some of the other stuff out there. So with that out of the way, let's get back. Let's talk about wide receivers. I don't know if I really need to spend a lot of time telling people to play Antonio Brown, Scott, but I wanted to note this. We always talk about Big Ben's home and road splits. Did you know that his indoor splits, so these are in stadiums like Dallas or Indianapolis, so places with a dome or basically a dome, actually dwarf his home splits. He's much better in a dome. So now he's got a week off to prepare for Indianapolis, and he's like an old quarterback that's always banged up. I think this is kind of why I like Le'Veon Bell. The Steelers, this is just going to be a complete annihilation of Indianapolis, in my opinion. This is going to be like the Rams last week where they put up 50 points, and I want parts of this passing game and guys like Powell and Darkwa and some other cheap plays. I think I can afford Antonio Brown pretty easily.
Right. So I mean, I'm not going to put too much stock into the dome splits. Typically, if it's a split stat that I can't, really just common sense come to reasoning why that is the case, I'm going to lean towards it being kind of not buying into it, probably a small sample. Like you could look at Odell Beckham Jr. averages 6 fantasy points per game more in even week games than odd week games. So you can just make anything.
So a dome, it's indoors, it's perfect conditions. It's not cold in Cincinnati in week 16. I don't know. I think I put a little bit of stock into it.
Sure. I'll perfect weather conditions. I'll give him a boost of 0.5 fantasy points or something. But yeah, Antonio Brown's going to smash. I have a big day projected for Ben Roethlisberger. Here's the reasoning for Brown, and then I'll give you the counter reasoning. Indianapolis ranks last in deep fantasy points per game allowed to receivers, and they're allowing the second most fantasy points per game to left wide receivers. Antonio Brown leads the league in air yards per game, deep targets per game, and he runs 53% of his routes from left wide receiver. Definitely should be a smash spot. But because Tyler wrote up Brown, I wanted to give the counter argument and a different wide receiver because he's not here to defend himself.
Well, yeah, your stud's like a lot. If money's a thing in DFS, this isn't like what is it? Money ain't a thing. Is that Jermaine Dupri? You gotta have a salary cap. So you got AJ Green, and if you can't afford Brown, you just swap to Green, and life's pretty good.
Yeah. So the case for Green is a case against Brown. Indianapolis has done a pretty good job of holding wide receiver ones in check. AJ Green had only 27 yards against them in week 8. Doug Baldwin only had 35 in week 4. Larry Fitzgerald, 21 yards in week 2. DeAndre Hopkins had 86 last week, but he also saw 16 targets. So I watched
Tom Savage targets though. Tom Savage.
That's true. So 5 real targets. Fair point.
Okay.
So I went back and I watched the AJ Green game against Indianapolis, and he brought a lot of safety help over the top for Green. The safety would shift to Green's side of the field post snap on the majority of plays, like almost every single one, but especially in the end zone. And they kind of did the same for Hopkins. Will that be able to stop Brown? I don't know. Probably not. It's Antonio Brown. But I do know Green is between $1,400 and $1,800 cheaper on both sites, and we do not have the same concerns for Tennessee. Indianapolis ranks 15th best in schedule-adjusted fantasy points per game to wide receiver ones, while Tennessee ranks second worst. DeAndre Hopkins, 27 points. Doug Baldwin, 27 points. Jeremy Maclin, 18 points. Amari Cooper, 17. Landry and Marquise Lee both had 15 points. I guess we're running. I probably shouldn't go too in-depth into this, but I'm working on a model that looks at where wide receivers score most of their points by direction and depth of target. And a lot of AJ Green's fantasy points comes from the intermediate middle of the field, where Tennessee is hemorrhaging a ton of their points. So a lot of reasons to like Green, but also a lot of reasons to like Brown for sure.
You got to think too, after his rear naked choke, second round victory, like this is kind of like the squeaky wheel. I think the last time we saw this was that Green Bay explosion game. I think it was week 3. You got to think some of that's built into it too. So how about that? How about that rear naked choke he laid on Jalen
Ramsey? He's angry. He's got something to prove.
He watched GSP Saturday night and was like, you know what, Jalen Ramsey, I'm going to take it out. I want to talk about one of my value receivers. There's a lot. We could talk about Marvin Jones hype. Everyone's going to be talking about Marvin Jones this week. So I'm going to skip over him. I want Sterling Shepard because when we get to tight ends, I don't know. I think you're a donkey. This is probably a hot take if you play Evan Ingram this week. So I'm on Sterling Shepard, the matchup. So he plays 85% of his snaps out of the slot. Kawan Williams, this guy should not be playing in the NFL. He's probably going to retire after this game. He plays 98% of his snaps in the slot. So why don't we want to target him? On PFF, Williams ranks 112 out of 115 quarterbacks. He sees a target every 4.1 snaps. That's the highest ratio in the league, and he's allowing almost a 100 quarterback rating when being thrown at in the slot. I talk a lot about that Pat Thorman Pace article. Here's some tidbits from it. The 49ers are allowing the league's most snaps in an average of 30 points per game over the last month, and San Francisco is a volume enhancer. Their games average a league-high 136 plays, and even more during the last month. That's up to 138. So with all these plays, I like Darkwa. I like Sterling Shepard. Those are the good matchups. The tight end matchup, not very good. We got to see where Evan Ingram lines up. But I like Sterling Shepard. This price is too cheap, Scott.
Right. And you hit on all the things that I would have said. He's coming off of a tough matchup to get the ideal matchup for any slot wide receiver. I do think that they're going to be a little less good against the tight end with Jaquiski Tartt and Jimmy Smith both out. Jimmy Ward, I'm sorry.
I didn't see those. Now my whole argument. You just crushed me on that.
But no, but I still agree with you. I think Shepard's the much better play than Evan Ingram. But I do
500 on DraftKings. It just fits. Fits everything I want to do.
His like price tag rank is like 15 spots lower than where I have him in my rankings. I'm gonna have him on a ton of lineups.
All right, shoot a couple guys. I mean, Marvin Jones, if you want to play, is fine. I think the deep targets should be there. You got a couple guys a little bit more off the radar, though.
Yeah, I mean, he has a tough matchup against Jason McCourty, but the volume has been like Antonio Brown levels, so definitely you could see you playing him. Robbie Anderson, Devontae Parker, Adam Thielen. I could talk about any of these guys. I'll talk about Adam Thielen, though, just because I haven't heard too many good arguments for him. He ranks 4th in slot targets. He runs 61% of his routes from the slot in games Stephon Diggs has played. Only 5 times this season has a wide receiver scored at least 11 fantasy points against Washington. It's Doug Baldwin, Nelson Aguilar twice, Aldrick Robinson, and Mac Hollins. 91% of those players' fantasy points against Washington have come from the slot. Opposing passers are averaging a passer rating of 101.2 when targeting wide receivers in the slot, as opposed to 53.0 when targeting wide receivers outside. That's the largest differential. One final way of putting this, they're allowing the 6th most fantasy points per game to slot wide receivers and the fewest to outside wide receivers. They're a slot funnel defense, kind of also bad against tight ends. Thielen ranks 7th among wide receivers in expected fantasy points per game. The number drops to only 12th in games Diggs has played. I'm expecting a big game from him.
Yeah, you mentioned Robbie Anderson, that deep targets, Tampa Bay. I know Brent Grimes back, but that looks like a spectacular combo. No Curly. Curly's out for taking he was taking the same stuff that Brazilian or John Jones is on from the UFC, whatever that was. So he's out for a couple of games. But I like that. What about what's his name here? Adam Humphries is going to be kind of the talk of the town for 3,100. You got any hot takes on him? I don't know. 6 to 7 targets seems pretty reasonable from Ryan Fitzpatrick. It's just how good are those targets going to be? I don't know if I'm going to need. I'd rather spend 4,500 on Bilal Powell or Orleans Darkwa than take kind of what I think is a little bit of a long shot on Humphries, even though there's a lot of pretty good reasons to use him.
Yeah, no Evans, Claiborne on Deshaun Jackson. Buster Screen ranks bottom 3 among cornerbacks in fantasy points per route and fantasy points per target allowed. Grades out poorly. Makes a lot of sense, but at the same time, it's still just Adam Humphries. So I don't think he's a must play in cash. I will say I do think he is a good play, but I prefer maybe someone like Cameron Brate if I had to pick someone on Tampa Bay. Also, sorry, one more stat is that outside of Evans, Humphries has been Fitzpatrick's most targeted receiver this season.
Favorite Rams receiver?
That's a really tough one that I've gone back and forth on. Just pulling up my notes, they're super susceptible deep, which gives an edge to Sammy Watkins. He leads in deep targets, more than double the next closest receiver. They're still low among all receivers. They're very vulnerable to where Robert Woods is playing, his position of the field. I don't know, probably not really playing too many of them this week. I think there's just too much uncertainty there.
All right, let's go to tight end. And I guess you can just start off. If you have the money this week, probably play Rob Gronkowski. I believe he's had, I don't know if you have it in here, but I can't give credit to somewhere, but basically every time he goes up against Denver, I think it's over the last 4 games, it's just monster game, monster game, monster game. All the targets when New England faces Denver, they go to Rob Gronkowski and they go to running backs. They basically forget wide receivers are even on the field.
Yeah, so I think Rich Rebar said it on a RotoGrinders podcast. It's like Rob Gronkowski, Cameron Brate, Brent Selleck, and then like that's it. No other tight ends this week. And like honestly, I'm completely fine with that. If I'm playing FanDuel, I want 100% Rob Gronkowski. All right, maybe like 80%, but still like way too much. Like too much to where it's dangerous. He leads all tight ends in expected fantasy points per game with 2.5 more than next closest. He ranks 5th among all receivers in actual fantasy points per game. He ranks 18th in targets per game, top 10 in red zone and end zone targets per game. Denver Broncos, that's a soft matchup. They rank 5th worst in schedule adjusted fantasy points per game allowed to tight ends. They are a tight end funnel defense. Mm-hmm. For 2 consecutive seasons, they lead the league in percentage of receiving fantasy points allowed to opposing tight ends. And a huge thing for him is Chris Hogan is doubtful for week 10. Him and Gronkowski combined to make up 63, between 63 and 74% of the team's targets inside the 5, inside the 10, end zone targets. So if Brady's throwing touchdown passes, it is going to Rob Gronkowski.
Yep. You mentioned a tight end funnel defense. That's definitely in Denver. I got another one for you, but Denver too. This is from Sharp Football. I use that quite a bit now. I think it's really nice. They allow 40% of running back passes to be successful. That's pretty good defense. 44% of wide receiver targets to be successful. That's seventh best, but 56% of tight end targets to be successful. 27th best in the league. And then you're throwing those targets to Rob Gronkowski. Come on. I mean, he's going to absolutely smash this week. I'm going to hit you with the most tight end funnel defense as my stud, because I don't know. I like Rob Gronkowski, but I don't know if I want Evan Ingram. I don't know if I want Jack Doyle. Can I interest you in Kyle Rudolph? So listen, hear me out on Kyle Rudolph. So Washington, they allow the lowest success rate on passes to wide receivers in the league, 39%. Jacksonville is at 40%, to give you an idea on that, while allowing 56% of tight end targets to be successful, 27th worst in the league. Across the board, they're at least 6 in DVOA against wide receiver 1s, 2s, and other wide receivers on Football Outsiders, 26 in DVOA against tight ends. He's got at least 7 targets in 4 straight games going up against Washington. I think Rudolph, if you can't afford these top tier guys and you're looking for consistency, is basically about the most consistent as you can get in kind of this mint tier. I'll take him over Brate without question this week, Scott.
Yeah, I don't hate it. Like I said, I think you attack Washington with your tight end or your slot wide receiver. So I like Thielen and I like Rudolph. Rudolph has seen between 7 and 9 targets in every game he's played following Dalvin Cook's injury. Redskins giving up the most receiving yards per game to tight ends, second most fantasy points per game over the past 2 seasons. Yeah, I like it.
All right, so sell me. I know Brate is going to be, I did the cash show with Head Chopper for DraftKings, and he liked Brate. And I don't know. I think it's a little risky with Ryan Fitzpatrick, and you still have with Mike Evans out of the way, how are the targets really going to get distributed? Does Tampa Bay just get completely blown out of the building? I think that's certainly a possibility as well here. Sell everybody on Brate. Looking at our ownership projections, projected to be a pretty highly owned tight end.
Yeah, so he quietly comes off of a really tough matchup against the Saints. Gronkowski was the only tight end to total more than 30 yards against them this year. But if we exclude that game, he's had at least 60 yards in all of his last 5 games, between 8 or 9 targets in 3 of his last 4, a touchdown in 4 of his last 6. He ranks 8th among tight ends in expected fantasy points per game, 6th in actual fantasy points per game. Yet he's the 13th highest priced tight end on DraftKings. So him and Evans have each seen 8 of the team's 28 red zone targets. No other receiver has more than 3. So it goes back to kind of that Gronk thing where with Evans out, he should be the safest bet for a touchdown in this game if there is one, and Vegas keeps betting up the total.
Are you ready for the OJ Howard troll week number 2? It's coming. It's coming.
Maybe. I mean, the matchup's good too, by the way. The Jets rank 4th worst in schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends.
You mentioned Selleck, 2,500 as a really cheap value tight end. David Njoku's 2,600. These are guys. Selleck, there's just nobody to catch passes in San Francisco other than Carlos Hyde. So I think Selleck by default is probably going to get like 6 or 7 targets. I want to hit you with Austin Hooper. You got Julio limping around. He's 3K on DK. Dallas not very good against the tight end. He played 83% of the snaps last week. Dallas, you look at Sharp Football, 54% of tight end targets are successful. That ranks 26th. In DVOA, Dallas also 26 over on Football Outsiders. I know he's not a sexy name, but he's 3K. If they're going to throw the ball and Julio's limping around out there, you got Freeman, who off the injury report, but I don't know if he's really 100%. I don't know. Call me crazy. I think Hooper's a nice tight end play this week, Scott.
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you. He's seen between 6 and 9 targets in 4 of his last 5. Dallas is allowing the 4th most fantasy points per game to tight ends over the past 2 seasons. Their numbers look a lot better this year, but the only tight end he faced who wasn't injured starting his first career game or ranking outside of the top 30 in fantasy points per game was Travis Kelce, and he put up 20.3 against them last week.
Yeah, I think Hooper's a pretty good one. What do you got for duds? I had a whole spiel on Ingram, but you already dissed me, so I'm going to save face, and I'm not going to spit out any of these statistics because they might not make much sense here. It looks like you don't like Charles Clay possibly coming back this week. You got anybody else you don't want to use?
Yeah, it's just the same thing I just mentioned about the Saints matchup. Can I give you my dud on wide receivers? Because
Let's do it.
I think it needs to
10
happen.
seconds. 10 seconds.
Oh, no, it's Keenan Allen, man. You guys are all wrong. I don't know why you keep talking about it. I'll tweet about it.
Jacksonville, you always take the out on wide receiver. No wide receivers against Jacksonville. So I had a fun time filling in for Tyler. We'll see him back next week. And for Scott, I'm Britt. Thanks, everybody, for watching. And we out ya.